Alright everyone, this is it. As I hinted a few months ago now, I am launching a continuation of my Jane Eyre project, and I am so eager to talk about Jane Eyre again. I have missed it. As many of you know, I have already reviewed 20-something different adaptations. What I'm going to be doing now is focusing on 9 major films and miniseries: the 1934, 1944, 1970, 1973, 1983, 1996, 1997, 2006, and 2011 adaptations, and doing a sort of adaptation comparison. I did consider leaving 1934 out because it's kind of the black sheep of the family, and I'm afraid my saying, "but that's not how that's supposed to happen," is going to get repetitive. But fair's fair, it is the first major film adaptation that still exists, and I know some people do like it, so I'm including it. Each video will focus on a particular scene or character, and I'll point out the differences and what I consider to be the strengths and weaknesses of the various renditions. And if I can make up my mind, I will try to pick a favorite at the end, but there's no guarantee of that. I am notoriously indecisive. Now, part of the reason why it's taken me so long to get this whole thing rolling is because I've been on the fence about where to begin. But I've decided to start with the horse scene. I know I'm skipping the whole first section of the book, and that's something I don't approve of in adaptations, but I do intend to look at Gateshead and Lowood a little later down the road by way of comparing character portrayals. I won't do a scene-by-scene thing there. I'll be looking at certain characters. For now, since the Jane and Rochester scenes do dominate the story, and since they are what I think Jane Eyre fans get most excited about, the horse scene seems like the best place to start. Shall we? The horse scene occurs in chapter 12 of Charlotte Bronte's novel, and it takes up about 5 pages in my old smelly edition, and it is an important scene because it introduces a major character, Mr. Rochester, Jane's employer, and the owner of Thornfield Hall, and it is the first meeting of our hero and heroine. Jane's chance encounter with the bad-tempered stranger who sprains his ankle when she accidentally spooks his horse leaves a lasting impression on her, but it's not until she returns to Thornfield that she learns the identity of this man. I'm afraid this scene in the 1934 version leaves a lot to be desired. The atmosphere is lacking, the broad daylight driving away any suggestion of mystery or loneliness, and the quick exchange between Jane and Rochester is disappointing. Virginia Bruce's Jane is obviously annoyed to the point of acting confrontational, even a little superior, like she's trying to put Rochester in his place. Rochester himself comes across as somewhat childish, though Colin Clive, who I am fond of generally, has so little to do that it's hard to get any impression of his character at all. The 1944 version makes up the atmosphere deficit left by the last movie by filling the scene with fog. I like fog though, so I'm okay with this. There's a huge dramatic build-up to the near collision, and then Orson Welles' Rochester erupts out of the fog to startle Jane and the viewer. Welles introduces Rochester with an intense masculinity, something I know puts some people off. He's curt and a little explosive, yet not so much that it deters Joan Fontaine's Jane from answering him back with a slight lift of her chin, a surprising reaction from one who seems so meek. I think he's pleasantly surprised to see a hint of latent spirit in her face. I am a little biased toward Orson Welles. I like him in other movies, and I grew up with this version, and so I tend to defend him. To his detractors in this scene, I do concede that I see where they're coming from, but I would also point out that his voice does calm down when he speaks to her conversationally, though he still retains the tone of a blustery country squire. The 1970 version takes a slightly unusual approach to the setup of the scene. Jane stops to watch the sunset, becoming almost bewitched by it, and doesn't notice the thud of hoofbeats until the horse is nearly on top of her. While not book accurate, it is an interesting take. What I don't like about this one is that Susanna York's Jane claims she was trying to get out of Rochester's way. This is not true, at least as far as the incident looks to me. And however flustered she was, I don't think Jane would be dishonest like that. George C. Scott takes the more ferocious tack with his Rochester, something I don't care for with his portrayal in general, but looking at all the interpretations in succession, I realize that in this particular scene, he's no rougher than some other Rochesters, less so than a couple, in fact, and I do like his delivery of this line.
Steady. What is it you do to horses?
Now, the 1973 version is probably the most faithful to the book. It's nighttime, Saoirse Cusack's Jane narrates the scene, describing her state of mind, lingering to look at the moon, mentioning the guy trash. Regarding the horse's fall, it doesn't seem to me like Jane caused the horse to startle at all, as the tumble occurs a moment after the horse has passed her. This is extra noticeable because the scene is split into two parts, and you have to wait for the opening titles of the next episode to finish before the scene continues. Michael Jaston's Rochester is vexed, but his cranky comments are mostly directed at Pilot, the dog, for getting in his way, not so much at Jane. He becomes more good-natured once he starts asking her questions, and Jane responds in kind. Are they both too good-natured? Maybe, but I find it hard to criticize Jaston especially for being too good-natured because he's just so likable. The whimsical connection that they share that dominates in this version is at play right from the start, with his line,
"Are you a sprite or an elf to be out so late?"
"I'm a governess, sir."
And I like the way he says the line, "Whose house is it?" as if he's issuing a challenge. Oh yeah, you live there? Prove it.
You live just below, the house with the battlements.
"Yes."
Whose house is it?
"Mr. Rochester's."
I know I said that 73 is probably the most faithful version, but 73 and 83 are really always in competition over which one is the most faithful adaptation. The 1983 version is also set at nighttime, and Zela Clark's Jane appears as one wandering contentedly in the darkness. There's a pervasive feeling of foreboding and mystery that increases when the horse almost crashes into her standing at a curve in the road, and it doesn't fade when we finally see Rochester's face emerge from the shadows. Timothy Dalton plays the stern, irritated card throughout the whole scene. He doesn't shout or rage at her, but he never comes down from his height of irritation or leave Jane with any sardonic witticisms to ponder. Perhaps because he is so aloof, and because Jane is very quiet and guarded in her answers, this version feels shorter than the others. The 1996 version plays it a different way entirely. It's certainly the most beautifully rendered in terms of scenery, photography, and music. Pretty as the music is, though, it does sound like the build-up to an intensely romantic moment, which this is not supposed to be, and at a certain point, basically when Rochester's horse dumps him on the ground, the music doesn't fit and should have cut out. They also do something unusual with the fall in this one. Rochester gives Jane a double take as he rides by, apparently so distracted with staring at her that he misdirects his horse and, I don't know, running on the grass makes the horse tumble. Not sure what's going on there. William Hurt's Rochester is not cranky at all, just winded, which is nice if you dislike the crankiness of other versions, but if he isn't cranky in this scene, is it really Rochester? He responds to the incident with relative calm and sounds sincere when he thanks Charlotte Gainsborough's Jane for her help. It's all so different, but I do like the unique delivery of a few lines. Rochester's disbelieving,
"What, do you mean that house with the battlements?"
"Yes, sir."
as well as this quick exchange.
"Did you get hold of my horse's bridle and lead him to me? You're not afraid?"
"No, sir."
The 1997 version reinstates the voiceover, with Samantha Morton's Jane describing her restlessness and yearning for excitement. Rochester's fall is transferred to a watery setting and follows a lengthy build-up that uses way too much slow motion to generate drama. Morton's Jane shows more open dislike toward Rochester than I like to see. She's clearly insulted by Rochester's rudeness, but in the book, Jane says that his lack of polished manners actually make her feel more at ease in his presence. Now, maybe Ciarán Hinds' Rochester does deserve her strong negative reaction for cursing at her so violently, but I can understand his fury. This is the only Rochester I've ever seen who gets dumped in a river. I'd be mad too. But Rochester does call her a witch in a not unfriendly way, showing that he's softened somewhat even if she hasn't, and delivers this cryptic line.
Give my regards to Mr. Rochester. Come on, pilot!
The 2006 version sets the scene on a cloudy, misty day. No moonlight, but it is dusky, and they build up to the big moment by cleverly juxtaposing shots of the rushing horse with calm images of Jane taking her time and pausing to fix her shoe. Rochester gets knocked down, but not for long. The quickness with which he pops up is a little startling, not unlike Orson Welles' sudden, "Boom! Here I am!" I like the extensive inclusion of Jane trying and failing to get the horse. What I like even more is the establishment of mutual curiosity and interest between Ruth Wilson's Jane and Toby Stephens' Rochester. The dialogue is condensed and there are several lines that are not from the book, but the characters hit all the right marks, emphasizing the ones that are most important, and yes, the lines about her bewitching his horse are important. Even at this early point, Rochester is showing his playful side, and Jane is showing her independent streak.
Let me lay back. Miss Jane Eyre.
Lastly, we have the 2011 version of the scene, which is very blue and foggy. The oodles of atmosphere, I feel, are both a pro and a con. I love atmosphere and fog and spookiness, but there's so much of it. This one scene comes straight out of a moody gothic horror flick. It even has a jump scare. And the horse literally appears out of nowhere. It's not like Mia Wasikowska's Jane was in a daze not paying attention. She was alert, listening, and looking around like she felt something creeping up behind her. Rochester asks,
Where did you come from?
"But where did he come from?" While Michael Fassbender's Rochester is far tamer than most of the other Rochesters in this scene, he does show forced politeness and restrained annoyance. While I find his overall performance a little more subtle than I think Rochester should be, on repeated viewings of this scene, I quite like some of his line readings.
Make haste with your letter. Who knows what might lurk in these dark woods.
So those are the different horse scenes. It's a short scene, and yet isn't it interesting how each version puts its own spin on it? Having just watched them all again, I think my favorite is currently the 2006 version. It's just got a special spark to it, and the actors sell it for me in a way that sets it apart from the others. Following that, it's tough to say, because while I would have said that 83 and 73 lead the pack, I can see positives in most of the other versions, and this is why I stink at picking favorites. Alright, it's your turn. Whether you're an old Jane Eyre fan or a new one, I want to know your thoughts. Most of these scenes can be found here on YouTube, so I encourage you to do your own comparing and let me know which versions of the horse scene you prefer. Let's engage in a nitpicky but fun discussion of the horse scene. Thanks for watching!